All rights to the characters and storyline of Fruits Basket belong solely to its creators and copyright holders. This text is a fan-created interpretation and does not claim any ownership or official affiliation with the creators or distributors of Fruits Basket. All references to the character and their development are based on the original work and are intended solely for entertainment and discussion purposes. You don't go to parties. Chapter 1. During a peaceful break between classes, Tohru approached Kyo with her math workbook clutched to her chest, a slightly worried expression on her face. Kyo, do you think you could help me with this problem? I'm having a little trouble understanding it, she asked, her voice soft and a bit uncertain. Kyo looked up from his notebook, his orange hair falling slightly into his eyes as he met her gaze. He could see the confusion in her eyes and gave her a reassuring nod. Sure, Tohru, let me see what you got, he said, sliding closer to her. Tohru placed the workbook on the table between them, pointing to a problem that had clearly been giving her trouble. I understand the first part, but after that, I get a bit lost, she admitted, her brow furrowed in concentration. Kyo leaned in, his eyes scanning the equation. Okay, so you got the first part right. Now you just need to distribute this and then combine like terms, he explained, his voice calm and patient as he walked her through each step. Tohru watched intently, her pencil hovering over the page she tried to follow along. Oh, I see now. I think I was just overcomplicating it, she said, a small smile of relief crossing her face. Yeah, it's easy to do that, Kyo replied, glancing over at her with a slight smile of his own. But you're doing great. Just take it step by step. Just as Tohru was beginning to understand the problem, two familiar voices interrupted the quiet moment. Hey, Kyung, Hiroshi's voice rang out from across the courtyard, full of playful energy. Kyo's expression instantly shifted from calm to pretend annoyance. He rolled his eyes and sighed, turning to face the two approaching figures. What do you want? He asked. Hiroshi and Yuzuki, his two closest friends, strolled over with mischievous grins plastered on their face. We can't just say hi to our best bud, Yuzuki teased, nudging Hiroshi with his elbow. Or are we interrupting something important? He added, his eyes flickering to Tohru with a knowing smirk. Kyo's face heated up slightly, and he opened his mouth to retort, but before he could, Tohru looked up from her notebook with a cheerful smile. Hello, Hiroshi, Yuzuki. She greeted them, her voice polite and sweet. It's nice to see you. Yuzuki chuckled. Nice to see you too, Honda. Oh, Kyon here isn't boring you with all that math talk, he joked. Tohru giggled, softly shaking her head. Not at all. Kyo is really good at explaining things. He's been a big help, she said, glancing at Kyo with gratitude in her eyes. Kyo shifted uncomfortably, not quite sure how to respond to the compliment. Yeah, well, it's not that hard, he muttered, scratching the back of his head. Hiroshi and Yuzuki exchanged glances, clearly enjoying Kyo's discomfort. So, Kyo, you eating lunch with us today? Hiroshi asked, leaning against the table casually. We haven't had a proper hangout in a while. Kyo hesitated, his thoughts immediately drifting back to Tohru. He usually ate lunch with her, and the idea of leaving her alone, even for a day, didn't sit well with him. I don't know. He began glancing at Tohru, who was once again focused on her workbook. Tohru noticed his hesitation and looked up, catching the uncertainty in his eyes. Kyo, it's okay, she said, her voice gentle and encouraging. You should have lunch with your friends. I don't mind at all. Kyo frowned slightly. But I don't want you to be alone, he said, his concern evident in his tone. Tohru shook her head, her smile warm and reassuring. I won't be alone. Hana-chan and Ula-chan will be there with me. You don't have to worry, she assured him, her eyes shining with the characteristic kindness that always seemed to put him at ease. Kyo looked into her eyes, feeling the warmth spread through him again. It was impossible to say no to her when she looked at him like that. Are you sure? He asked, still a bit reluctant. Tohru nodded, her smile widening. Absolutely. It's important for you to spend time with your friends, too. I'll be fine, I promise. Kyo sighed, the guilt still gnawing at him, but her smile was just so genuine and comforting that he couldn't argue. He chuckled softly, giving her a playful nudge. Okay, dummy, he said with a grin. I'll go hang out with them for lunch, but we'll finish going over this problem later, alright? Tohru beamed at him, nodding eagerly. Of course, thank you, Kyo, she said, clearly pleased that he was agreeing to spend time with his friends. Hiroshi and Yuzuki watched the exchange with amused grins. Man, Kyo, you've gone soft, Yuzuki teased, shaking his head. Look at you, all worried about your girl. Kyo rolled his eyes, so there was a hint of a smile on his face. Shut up, he said, but his tone was light, lacking any real bite. He wrapped an arm around Tohru's shoulder in a casual but affectionate gesture. It's not possible to stop worrying about her, he added quietly, more to himself. Tohru blushed slightly, but stayed focused on her math problems, feeling the warmth of Kyo's arms around her. Hiroshi and Yuzuki exchanged exaggerated eye rolls, which only made Kyo chuckle. As they began to walk away, Kyo couldn't resist glancing back at Tohru one more time. Her head was bent over the workbook, her pencil moving as she continued working on the problems. The sight of her, so focused and determined, made him smile. Just before he turned back to his friends, Kyo caught Toru's eye, and she gave him a quick, encouraging smile. It was such a simple gesture, but it made him feel so reassured. Hiroshi and Yuzuki, noticing his distraction, laughed. "Come on, Kyon, don't go getting lost in your thoughts again," Hiroshi said with a grin. "We've got a lunch date later, remember?" Kyo rolled his eyes, but couldn't help the smile tugging at his lips. Yeah, I'm coming," he said, giving Toru one last look before heading off with his friends. And as he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling of guilt entirely, but knowing that Toru was okay with it made it easier. After all, her smile was more than enough to put his mind at ease. As the bell rang for lunch, Kyo turned to Toru with a soft look in his eyes. "Come here," he said, pulling her into a gentle hug. She leaned into him, her face nestled against his chest as she felt the steady beat of his heart. His arms wrapped around her, holding her close, as if he didn't want to let go. Kyo pulled back slightly, just enough to see her face, and carefully brushed a stray strand of hair out of her eyes. His touch was tender, almost reverent. "Make sure you eat something, okay? Don't get too distracted by talking," he murmured, his voice warm with concern. Toru smiled up at him, her eyes bright with affection. "I will, Kyo. You don't have to worry about me," she reassured him with a light giggle. Kyo's expression softened even more as he leaned down and placed a soft kiss on her forehead. "I love you," he whispered, his breath warm against her skin. Toru's heart fluttered at his words, her cheeks tinged with a rosy blush. "I love you more, Kyo," she whispered back, her voice barely audible. Kyo lingered for a moment, his forehead resting against hers before reluctantly letting her go. "See you later, okay?" he said, his voice a little gruff as he tried to mask his reluctance to leave. "Okay," Toru replied, smiling as she watched him walk away with Hiroshi and Yuzuki, who were waiting by the classroom door. Kyo turned back once more, giving her a small wave, which she returned with a bright smile. Toru gathered her things and made her way over to Uotani and Hanajima, who were chatting near the door. They both looked up and smiled as she approached. "Hey, Toru," Uotani greeted her, her usual tough girl demeanor softened by her affection for her friend. "Hi, Uo-chan, Hana-chan," Toru said cheerfully. "I was wondering, would it be okay if I ate lunch with you two today?" Uotani and Hanajima exchanged quick glances, their smiles fading slightly. Toru noticed the change and felt a pang of disappointment. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. Hanajima was the first to respond, her voice calm but apologetic. "I would love to have lunch with you, Toru, but I have tutoring today. I'm sorry." Uotani sighed, scratching the back of her neck. "Yeah, and I've got a doctor's appointment, so I'm skipping lunch and the rest of the day. Sorry, Toru." Toru's shoulders slumped slightly, but she quickly forced a smile. "Oh, that's okay. I understand," she said, trying to sound as upbeat as possible. "You both have important things to do." Uotani frowned and pulled Toru into a tight hug. "I hate to leave you hanging, Toru. We'll make it up to you tomorrow, okay?" Hanajima stepped forward and hugged Toru as well, her embrace gentle but firm. "We'll definitely have lunch together tomorrow," she promised, her voice soft and sincere. Toru smiled and hugged them back, grateful for their support. "Of course, don't worry about me," she assured them. After saying their goodbyes, Toru watched them leave the classroom, feeling a slight pang of loneliness. She had been looking forward to spending lunch with them, especially since Kyo was with his friends today. She sighed softly, deciding to head up to the rooftop, hoping to find a quiet spot to eat alone. When she reached the rooftop, she was surprised to see Yuki and Machi sitting together, quietly eating their lunches. Yuki's expression was calm and serene as he talked to Machi, who was listening intently with a small smile on her face. Toru hesitated at the entrance, unsure whether she should join them or not. She knew how rare it was for Yuki and Machi to have some time alone together, and she didn't want to intrude. She considered leaving and finding somewhere else to eat, but before she could make up her mind, Yuki noticed her standing there. "Miss Honda?" he called out, setting his bento box aside as he stood up, his silver eyes filled with concern. "What are you doing up here? Don't you usually eat with Kyo downstairs?" Toru smiled shyly, her hands clasped together nervously. "Kyo is eating lunch with his friends today, and Uo-chan and Hana-chan were busy," she explained, trying to keep her voice light and cheerful. Yuki's brows furrowed slightly, a hint of worry in his expression. "So, that means you don't have anyone to eat lunch with?" he asked gently. Toru quickly shook her head, waving her hands dismissively. "Oh no, it's okay. I don't mind eating alone," she insisted, trying to downplay the situation. "I was just going to find a quiet spot." Before she could turn and leave, Machi spoke up, her voice soft but firm. "Would you like to eat lunch with us, Toru?" Toru blinked in surprise, not expecting the invitation. She smiled warmly at them, but hesitated. "Thank you, but I don't want to intrude. You two probably want some time alone." Yuki shook his head, a gentle smile on his lips. "Nonsense, Miss Honda. You never intrude. We'd be happy to have you join us." Machi nodded in agreement, her own smile shy but sincere. "Yes, I'd really like to get to know you better, Toru." Toru's heart swelled with gratitude at their kindness. "Thank you so much," she said, her voice filled with warmth as she walked over and sat down beside them. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily between Yuki and Machi, with Toru listening contently. About 5 minutes later, Manabe appeared on the rooftop, his lunch in hand and his usual playful grin in place. Hey, Yuki, Manabe greeted, giving Yuki a playful slap on the back, causing Yuki to roll his eyes. Mind if I join you guys? Yuki sighed but nodded. Sure, Manabe. Manabe's eyes quickly landed on Tohru and his grin widened. Honda's joining us today, huh? He said, looking her up and down briefly before sitting down. The more the merrier. Tohru blushed slightly, feeling a little uncomfortable under his gaze, but she smiled politely and nodded. Yes, if that's okay. Of course it is, Manabe said, waving off his concern. Then, with a teasing tone, he added, don't you usually eat with your boyfriend? Before Tohru could respond, Yuki cut him with a smirk. The idiot ditched her today. Toru's eyes widened and she quickly shook her head. No, he didn't ditch me. He's just having lunch with his friends today, she explained frantically. But Yuki chuckled softly, his eyes twinkling with amusement. I'm just kidding, Miss Honda. Toru let out a small sigh of relief and smiled, returning to her lunch. She didn't talk much, content to just listen to the conversation happening around her, but she couldn't deny that she'd missed Kyo. She enjoyed their little lunch dates more than she let on, and the day felt a little bit lonelier without him by her side. She was pulled out of her thoughts by an interesting conversation. Manabe was asking Yuki, so, are you going to that huge party in the caves on Friday night? It's supposed to be the biggest one of the year. Yuki shook his head, his expression serious. I'm not really a party person. I think I'll pass. Manabe laughed, nudging Yuki playfully. Come on, Yuki, you're so lame. I swear, I'm gonna drag you to at least one party before we graduate. Tohru listened quietly, her thoughts drifting. She had never been one to go to big parties like that, preferring quieter, more peaceful gatherings. But as she thought about it, she realized she was graduating in 5 months. She didn't want to look back on her high school years and feel she had missed out on something important. She had never cared about going to parties before, so why was she thinking about it now? Was it because she was afraid of not being cool enough? Or maybe it was because deep down she was starting to wonder if there was more to experience before this chapter of her life came to an end. And as these thoughts swirled in her mind, she glanced up at Yuki and Machi, who were still engaged in conversation. She wondered if they ever felt the same way, or if she was just overthinking things as usual. You don't go to parties. Chapter 2. Kyo sat with his friends, but his mind was elsewhere. He could hear Hiroshi and Yuzuki talking, but their words faded into the background as his thoughts kept drifting back to Tohru. He could picture her perfectly, the way her eyes lit up when she was happy, her soft giggle that always made his heart skip a beat, and the gentle warmth that seemed to radiate from her whenever she smiled. Kyo liked his friends, but Tohru was different. She was everything to him, his best friend, the person he loved more than anything in the world. He felt a pang of guilt for ditching her today, even though she insisted he go with his friends. Kyo! Yuki's voice snapped him out of his thoughts, and Kyo blinked, realizing both of his friends were staring at him expectantly. Huh? What? Kyo mumbled, shaking his head slightly to cure his thoughts. Hiroshi and Yuzuki exchanged looks of exaggerated offense. Oh, so you're ignoring us, huh? Hiroshi teased, clutching his chest as if he'd been wounded. I'm hurt, Kyon. Seriously, man, Yuzuki chimed in, grinning. We were having a very important discussion here, and you're just zoning out on us. Kyo rolled his eyes, though he couldn't help the small smile tugging at his lips. Yeah, I'm listening now. What were you talking about? Hiroshi leaned in closer, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. We were asking if you're planning on going to the party on Friday. Kyo raised his eyebrows, clearly confused. What party? Both Hiroshi and Yuzuki gasped in exaggerated shock, as if Kyo had just revealed some grave ignorance. You don't know about the party? Hiroshi exclaimed, widening his eyes in mock horror. Yuzuki shook his head, tutting as if in disbelief. It's only the biggest party of the year, man. How could you not know? Kyo frowned, slightly unimpressed. I still don't know what you're talking about. Yuzuki leaned back, crossing his arms with a smirk. It's this huge party in the caves. The whole school's invited. It's supposed to be legendary. Kyo shrugged, his interest clearly waning. Doesn't sound like my scene. Tight spaces, lots of people. I'm not really into that. Hiroshi groaned, slumping dramatically in his seat. Come on, Kyo. It's our last year of high school. You don't want to miss out on this, do you? It's the last chance to go to one of these things. Yuzuki nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, man, you gotta at least say you've been to one epic party before we graduate. Who knows? You might actually have fun. Kyo was about to respond when the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. Hiroshi stood up, clapping Kyo on the back as he did. Just think about it, okay? Don't be a party pooper. Yuzuki followed suit, giving Kyo a pat on the shoulder. Yeah, give it some thought, Kyo. You might surprise yourself. Kyo watched them leave, lingering for a moment as he mulled over their words. He couldn't deny that part of him was curious, but the idea of being cramped into tight spaces with a bunch of rowdy people still didn't appeal to him. With a sigh, he got up and headed to class. When he entered the classroom, his eyes immediately sought out Tohru. She was already at her desk, lost in thought. Her brow furrowed slightly as she gazed at the notebook in front of her. The sunlight streamed in through the windows, casting a warm glow over her, and Kyo felt his heart skip a beat. She looked so serene, so beautiful. He couldn't resist the urge to be close to her. Quietly, Kyo walked up behind her and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into a gentle embrace. He leaned down, his lips close to her ear, and whispered, "What's going on in that pretty head of yours?" Tohru jumped slightly at the unexpected contact, but as soon as she realized it was Kyo, she relaxed into his arms, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Oh, Kyo, you startled me," she said softly, turning her head slightly to look up at him. "I was just thinking. Nothing important." Kyo chuckled, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "You sure? You looked pretty deep in thought." Tohru nodded, her cheeks tinged with a slight flush. "Really, it's nothing. How's your lunch with Hiroshi and Yuzuki?" Kyo moved to sit in the desk next to her, resting his chin in his hand as he watched her. "Honestly, pretty lame. I kept thinking about how much I wanted to be with you instead." Tohru's smile brightened at his words, and she ducked her head slightly, feeling her heart flutter. "Kyo, you didn't have to worry about me. I was fine." Kyo reached out, twirling a strand of hair between his fingers. "Still, I missed you." "Who'd you eat lunch with?" Tohru hesitated for a moment before answering. "I ate with Yuki, Machi, and Manabe." Kyo huffed a laugh, shaking his head. "I don't know how Yuki puts up with Manabe. That guy's so annoying." Tohru giggled softly. "He's not so bad once you get to know him. He's actually quite nice." Before Kyo could respond, the second bell rang, signaling the start of class. Kyo sighed, leaning over to press a quick kiss to the top of Tohru's head before standing up. "We'll talk more later, okay?" Tohru nodded, her cheeks flushing a deeper shade of pink as she smiled up at him. "Okay." Kyo gave her one last smile before heading to his desk, feeling a sense of contentment settle over him as he sat down. Even though lunch had been a bit of a drag, being back with Tohru made everything better. As the final bell echoed through the hall, signaling the end of the school day, Tohru and Kyo packed their things and made their way out of the classroom together. The corridors were filled with the usual after-school chatter, but Tohru and Kyo walked at their own pace, lost in the comfort of each other's presence. Just as they were nearing the main entrance, Kyo heard a pair of familiar, overly enthusiastic voices calling out, "Kyon Kyon." He groaned inwardly, already knowing who it was before he even turned around, and with a resigned sigh, he looked over his shoulders to see Hiroshi and Yuzuki making their way toward him, grinning like a couple of mischievous kids. "Kyon Kyon," Hiroshi called out, this time waving exaggeratedly. "Don't forget to think about it." Kyo rolled his eyes, his patient already wearing thin. "It's still a no," he shouted back, his tone a mix of annoyance and amusement. His friends responded with mock disappointment, cupping their hands around their mouths to boo him from across the hallway. "Boo, you're no fun," Yuzuki teased, but the playful glint in his eyes showed he wasn't really upset. Tohru, who had been quietly watching with exchange, looked up at Kyo with a curious smile. "What was that about, Kyo?" Kyo shrugged, slipping his hands into his pockets as he continued walking. "Just another one of their dumb ideas. Nothing I'm interested in." Tohru giggled softly, her laughter light. Kyo glanced at her, his heart softening at the sound. "What's so funny this time?" Tohru smiled up at him, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "It's just you and your friends. You have such an interesting relationship with them." Kyo couldn't help but chuckle, pulling her a little closer as they walked. "Yeah, well, I seem to have a bad habit of attracting weirdos in my life." Tohru's giggle was infectious as she playfully responded, "Oh, I see. Well, good thing I'm completely normal." Kyo raised an eyebrow, giving her a teasing look. "You? Normal? You're the oddest of them all, Tohru." She pretended to be offended, her eyes widening in mock surprise. "Me? Really?" Kyo laughed, his tone softening as he shook his head. "Yes, you dummy. You're definitely the weirdest, but I wouldn't have it any other way." Tohru's smile grew wider, her cheeks tinged with a faint blush. "Really? You wouldn't change a thing?" Kyo nodded, his expression turning serious for a moment as he looked into her eyes. "Not a single thing." Tohru's heart skipped a beat at his words, feeling warmth spread through her chest. She always knew Kyo cared about her, but moments like this, when he showed his feelings so openly, always took her by surprise. They continued walking, the chilly fall breeze rustling the leaves around them as they chatted about anything that came to mind. Kyo told her about the latest happening at the dojo, while Tohru shared a funny story about something that happened during her cooking class. Their conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter and the kind of comfort that comes from knowing someone so well. As they neared the crosswalk where they usually parted ways, Kyo heading to the dojo and Tohru back to Shigure's house, Tohru felt a pang of sadness. She always hated saying goodbye to Kyo, even if it was just for a few hours. She was about to say something when Kyo suddenly pulled her into a tight hug, catching her off guard. Kyo held her close, his arms wrapped securely around her as if he never wanted to let go. "I'll see you later, okay?" he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. Tohru closed her eyes, leaning into the embrace and savoring the moment. "Okay," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Kyo pulled back slightly, just enough to look down at her. He reached up, gently brushing a strand of hair out of her face, his fingers lingering for a moment longer than necessary. Make sure you work on that worksheet, okay? Don't get too distracted by talking with Shigure or whoever and forget. Tohru giggled, nodding. I won't, I promise. Kyo smiled, his expression soft as he leaned down and pressed a tender kiss to her forehead. I love you, Tohru. Her heart fluttered at his words, a warm, happy feeling spreading to her chest. I love you more, Kyo, she replied, her voice filled with affection. With one last smile, Kyo finally let her go, stepping back and giving her a little wave before turning to head towards the dojo. As he walked away, he glanced back at her over his shoulder, his eyes lingering on her for just a moment longer. Tohru watched him go, her heart feeling full as she waved back. She stood there for a few seconds, watching until he disappeared around the corner, before turning to continue her own walk to Shigure's house. Even though they were apart now, the warmth of his embrace and the memory of his words stayed with her, making her feel like he was still right beside her. As Tohru walked home, her mind was consumed by Manabe's words. Graduation was fast approaching, and the thought of it filled her with both excitement and anxiety. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was missing out on something. What would she tell her kids one day? That she had never been to a high school party? That she spent her free time at home reading mystery novels instead of living out the typical teenage experience? The idea felt lame, especially considering her mother's legacy. Kyoko Honda, the infamous Crimson Butterfly, had lived a life full of adventure and rebellion, yet here Tohru was, playing it safe, and missing out on what might be a rite of passage. She sighed as she mulled over her thoughts, imagining her mother's mischievous grin and the teasing way she might encourage Tohru to step out of her comfort zone. After all, Kyoko wasn't one to let life pass her by, so why should she? As she approached Shigure's house, Tohru noticed how quiet it was. She stepped inside and found a note on the kitchen counter from Shigure, letting her know that he wouldn't be back until the next morning. Guess it's just me tonight, she muttered to herself, feeling a slight pang of loneliness. Without the usual bustle of the household, there was no reason to rush dinner. She headed upstairs, deciding to change out of her school uniform. Tohru slipped into a pair of pink-ripped skinny jeans and a white long-sleeved baby doll top. She took her time braiding her hair off to the side, tying it with a pink ribbon. When she was done, she flopped onto her bed, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. If she went to the party, she knew she shouldn't go alone, but who would she go with? Kyo wasn't a party person. In fact, he barely tolerated birthday parties, so a high school party was likely out of the question for him. The thought brought a small frown to her face. She couldn't help but feel a little bit disappointed. Dancing with Kyo sounded like so much fun. She tossed around names in her head, thinking of who might be up for the idea, and after a few minutes, she settled on Uo-chan. If anyone would be up for a party, it was Arisa. Pulling out her phone, Tohru dialed Arisa's number, her finger trembling slightly with anticipation. Arisa picked up on the second ring with a warm, "Hey Tohru, what's up?" They chatted for a few minutes, catching up on their day before Tohru nervously brought up the party. "Uo-chan, have you heard about the party on Friday? It's, in the caves?" Arisa's tone shifted to one of mild confusion. "Yeah, I've heard about it. Why? Are you thinking of going?" Tohru hesitated for a second before replying, "Well, yes. I was thinking, we're graduating soon and I've never been to a high school party. I thought it might be fun to go. Just once." There was a brief silence on the other end before Arisa burst out laughing. "Tohru, I never thought I'd hear you say that. Kyoko would be so proud." Tohru giggled, feeling a bit shy. "Do you think so?" "Definitely," Arisa said, her voice full of affection. "She always wanted you to try new things. I think going to a party is a great idea, and if you're going, I'm going too. No way I'm letting you do this alone." Tohru squealed with excitement, unable to contain her joy. "Really, Uo-chan? This is going to be so much fun." Arisa chuckled, her laughter deep and warm. "You're such a goofball, Tohru. But yeah, it'll be fun. You'll see." Tohru smiled, feeling her heart swell with gratitude. "That's the second time someone's called me weird today," she said with a laugh. "Well, you are weird," Arisa teased. "But that's what makes you so great. Anyways, I gotta run, but I'll see you tomorrow, okay?" "Okay, thanks, Uo-chan. I'll talk to you later." Tohru hung up the phone, feeling a rush of exhilaration. She was really going to do it. She was going to a high school party. But as the excitement bubbled within her, a new question popped into her head. What was she going to wear? She sprang off her bed and hurried to her closet, rifling through her clothes with renewed energy. Dresses, skirts, tops, everything was suddenly under consideration. She wanted to look nice, but not too out of place. Something cute but comfortable, maybe a little bit daring, but still her. As she pulled out a few options, she caught her reflection in the mirror. For a moment, she paused, thinking about how far she'd come. The shy, uncertain girl who had moved into Shigure's house all those months ago was slowly growing into someone new. Someone who was ready to take a few more risks. to step out of the shadows of her past and make memories she could be proud of. She smiled at herself, feeling a sense of determination rise within her. This party wasn't just about having fun. It was about proving to herself that she could embrace life in all its unpredictability. And maybe, just maybe, she could show Kyo a side of her he hadn't seen before. With that thought in mind, Tohru laid out her clothes for the next day, her heart full of anticipation for what was to come. You Don't Go to Parties, Chapter 3. Kyo arrived home to an unusually quiet house. The clock on the wall showed it was approaching 8 p.m., and typically the house was still abuzz with activity. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing through the emptiness. There was no response. He furrowed his brow and made his way up the stairs. Passing by Tohru's room, he knocked gently on the door. "Tohru, are you in there?" he asked, but again he was met with silence. A hint of concern crept over him. He pushed the door open slightly and peered inside. The room was dark, the only light coming from the hallway casting a thin light across the floor. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he spotted Tohru lying on the bed, curled up on her side. Her breathing was soft and rhythmic, indicating she was fast asleep. Kyo felt a pang of guilt, but wanted to ensure she was all right. He sat on the edge of the bed and gently shook her awake. "Tohru," he said softly. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, and she blinked a few times, trying to focus. When she finally saw Kyo, a sleepy smile spread across her face. "Kyo," she murmured, her voice drowsy and warm. "Hey," Kyo replied with a tender smile. "Looks like you fell asleep." Tohru rubbed her eyes and mumbled, "Oh, I didn't realize I was so tired. I must have dozed off." Kyo's smile widened. "You must have needed the rest." He brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear. "You feeling all right?" Tohru leaned into his chest, feeling comforted by his presence. "I'm okay. Just a bit sleepy," she said softly. Kyo wrapped his arms around her, providing a sense of warmth and security. "Have you had dinner yet?" he asked. She shook her head, her voice muffled against his chest. "Not yet. It was just going to be me, so I didn't rush." Kyo nodded, his arms holding her close. "Are you hungry now?" Tohru nodded again, her voice still sleepy. "I can cook something if you'd like," Kyo offered, his voice gentle. Tohru shook her head again. "No, it's okay. I'll start cooking once I'm more awake. It's no trouble." "Take your time," Kyo said softly. He enjoyed these quiet moments with Tohru, especially when she relied on him for comfort. After a while, Tohru began to stir more awake. Kyo excused himself to take a quick shower. When he returned downstairs, he was dressed casually in gray sweatpants and a dark green hoodie, his orange hair still damp and tousled from the towel. He wandered into the kitchen, where Tohru was now focused on preparing dinner. Kyo admired how at ease she was, moving with practiced grace. He approached her from behind, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Hey you," he whispered softly in her ear. Tohru shivered slightly at the cool touch of his damp hair against her neck. She turned her head and smiled up at him. "Hey," she whispered back. Kyo gently cupped her chin, tilting his face towards him. "I missed you today," he murmured, as he leaned in and pressed a tender kiss to her lips. The kiss was sweet and gentle, but soon turned deeper, their emotions intensifying. Tohru responded eagerly, turning to face him fully. Kyo pressed his body against hers, his hands roaming down her torso. She shivered with pleasure as their kisses grew more fervent. Kyo carefully lifted her, guiding her to sit on the kitchen counter. He spread her legs gently to get closer to her, his kisses moving to her neck, the soft, breathy sounds she made sending a wave of heat through him. Before their passion could escalate further, the front door creaked open. "I'm home," Yuki's voice echoed through the house. Kyo let out a frustrated groan and reluctantly pulled away. He carefully lifted Tohru off the counter, his eyes meeting hers with a mix of regret and affection. "Fun's over." She giggled softly as he pressed one last gentle kiss to her lips, this one sweet and innocent. "I love you," Kyo said softly. Tohru's eyes sparkled as she replied, "I love you too." Kyo gave her a warm smile before heading to the Kuatsu. A few moments later, Yuki entered the kitchen, offering Tohru a friendly smile. "Hi, Miss Honda. Have you had dinner yet?" Tohru greeted him with a bright smile. "Not yet. I was just finishing up. Dinner will be ready soon." Yuki nodded and took a seat at the Kuatsu. As Tohru turned to join him, she noticed Manabe walking in behind Yuki. Out of his school uniform, Manabe looked different. He was scanning the house curiously, and when his gaze landed on Tohru, he grinned. "Hey, Honda," Manabe called out with a cheerful wave. Tohru smiled warmly. "Hi, Manabe. Are you and Yuki hungry? The food is almost ready." Manabe's grin widened. "Yeah, we're starving. Thanks a lot." He walked over to join Kyo and Yuki at the Kuatsu. Kyo glanced up as Manabe sat down and muttered a casual, "Hey." Kyo had only interacted with Manabe a few times, and while he found him somewhat irritating, he appreciated that Manabe was friendly with Tohru. Manabe nodded and settled in beside Yuki. Yuki and Manabe began chatting about their day. "So how was your day, Yuki?" Tohru asked as she joined them, setting a few plates on the table. "It was pretty busy," he replied, a small smile on his face. "Student council meeting and then hanging out with Machi afterwards. How about you?" "Just a quiet day at home," Tohru said, her cheeks slightly flushing from the earlier intimacy. "I took a nap and then started preparing dinner." Manabe nodded approvingly. "Sounds nice. Looking forward to eating. I've heard your cooking is amazing." Tohru blushed modestly. "Thank you, Manabe. I hope it lives up to the hype." Kyo focused on the TV, letting the conversation wash over him. The warmth of the kawasu and the comforting hum of conversation created a relaxed atmosphere. Kyo felt a deep sense of contentment as he settled in the evening with Tohru, Yuki, and Manabe. The room was filled with the comforting sounds of friendship and the promise of a delicious meal. Kyo felt a wave of relief as Tohru emerged from the kitchen, balancing a tray of steaming dishes. The rich aroma of her cooking filled the room, and Kyo's hunger, along with the tension in his head, began to ease. He watched as she set the food down on the kawasu, the warm, comforting sight of her putting a genuine smile on his face. "Dinner's ready," Tohru announced cheerfully, her voice bright and inviting. Kyo began to serve himself, focusing on his plate, though he kept an eye on Tohru. As he ate, he could feel a headache creeping up on him, a dull ache in his temple. He stole glances at Tohru, who had let her hair down from its messy braid. It cascaded over her shoulder in gentle waves, and Kyo couldn't help but be captivated by her effortless beauty. Tohru, sensing the quiet comfort in the room, decided to strike up a conversation. "So, Manabe, what brings you over so late?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of curiosity. Manabe looked somewhat sheepish, scratching the back of his head. "Well, I locked myself out of my house, and my parents are out of town and won't be back until tomorrow morning." Yuki, who was sitting beside Manabe, rolled his eyes with a smirk. "Yeah, and Manabe here thought it'd be a great idea to crash at our place." Kyo scoffed, unable to hide his amusement. Tohru giggled at Yuki's comment, and their laughter seemed to lighten the mood. Manabe, unfazed, made a playful kissy face at Yuki, who just rolled his eyes again. Manabe, clearly trying to shift the conversation, asked Yuki, "Have you thought any more about going to the party this weekend?" Yuki shook his head firmly. "My answer's still no. I'm not going." Manabe groaned dramatically. "Seriously, Yuki, you're such a stick in the mud." He turned his attention to Kyo. "What about you, Kyo? Are you going?" Kyo shook his head with a dismissive shrug. "Nah, parties aren't really my thing." Manabe sighed, clearly frustrated. "You guys are so boring." His gaze then fell on Tohru, who was quietly eating. "What about you, Tohru? Are you planning to go?" Before Tohru could answer, both Kyo and Yuki chimed in almost simultaneously. "No, she's not going," Kyo said firmly. "Definitely not," Yuki added, nodding for emphasis. Tohru blushed and looked down, feeling self-conscious. She didn't want to cause any more tension. "It's true. I probably won't go," she admitted. "I'm not really the party type." Kyo quickly added, "Tohru would probably get trampled at a party like that." Her cheeks flushed in an even deeper shade of pink, and she looked away embarrassed. Yuki, not missing a beat, commented, "And Miss Hana has no sense of direction. She'd probably end up lost." Tohru's face fell slightly as she stared at her plate, her confidence shaken. Manabe, however, seemed intrigued by the dynamics at play. "You never know," he said, glancing between Tohru and the two boys. "She might surprise you." Kyo's protective instincts flared. He shot a wary look at Manabe. "It doesn't really matter. Tohru and I usually have something planned for Friday nights anyways." Tohru looked up, her eyes meeting Kyo's. "Actually, I do have plans this Friday," she said softly, her voice tinged with hesitation. Kyo's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Oh, you do?" Tohru bit her lip, her gaze falling to her lap. "I do, but if you'd rather me stay, I can cancel them." Kyo considered her words carefully. As much as he cherished their Friday nights together, he wanted her to have fun too. "No, you should go. It's important for you to enjoy yourself. I'll find something to do." Manabe uttered an ouch under his breath. Kyo's eyes narrowed, a flash of irritation crossing his face. He turned a sharp glare at Yuki. "Seriously, control your friend," Kyo snapped, his voice edged with frustration. Manabe looked genuinely shocked by the outburst. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, his voice tinged with confusion. Yuki, unfazed, shrugged. "Don't worry about it. Manabe's too much of an idiot to be taken seriously." Kyo's frustration didn't dissipate, but he forced himself to focus back on his meal, trying to push aside his growing headache. The conversation continued with Yuki and Manabe engaging in their usual banter, while Kyo remained mostly silent, his thoughts revolving around Tohru and the quiet moments he valued with her. As the clock approached 10, Yuki and Manabe finally made their way upstairs. Kyo, having spent the evening absorbed in his thoughts, observed Tohru as she began clearing the table and gathering the dishes. She looked effortlessly stunning in her pink-ripped skinny jeans, which accentuated her figure and drove Kyo wild. He couldn't take his eyes off of her. Tohru was humming softly to herself, clearly in her element as she tidied up. Kyo watched her for a moment, appreciating the gentle grace in her movements. He couldn't resist the urge to be near her. Quietly, he followed her to the kitchen, his gaze fixed on her. She was in the middle of rinsing the bowls when she noticed Kyo standing close beside her. "Hi, Kyo," she said, her voice warm and welcoming. "Did you need something?" Kyo didn't respond verbally. Instead, he reached out, gently taking the dish from her hands and settling them carefully in the sink. And, with a decisive twist, he turned off the water, then turned his full attention toward her. Tohru looked up at him with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. "Is something wrong?" Without a word, Kyo pulled her closer, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that started tender, but quickly grew more passionate. Tohru's eyes widened slightly, but she melted into the kiss, her body responding eagerly to the intensity of his touch. Kyo lifted her effortlessly on the counter, his lips never leaving hers. Their kiss deepened, filled with an urgency that left them both breathless. After a minute, Tohru pulled back slightly, her eyes filled with longing. "What about the dishes?" she whispered, her voice breathy and filled with anticipation. Kyo looked at her with desire burning in his eyes. Leaning close, he murmured in a low, husky tone, "They'll still be there when I'm done with you." Tohru's heart raced at his words. She leaned back into his kiss, her body arching towards him as his hands roamed over her. Kyo's kisses trailed down her neck and along her collarbone, sending shivers through her. The moment was abruptly interrupted by an "oh shit" from behind them. Kyo pulled away, irritation flashing in his eyes. He turned to see Manabe standing there, looking awkward and slightly uncomfortable. Kyo's headache, which had been lurking in the edges of his awareness, now seemed to intensify. "What do you want?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Manabe shifted on his feet, looking sheepish. "I'm really sorry for interrupting. I just came for a glass of water." Tohru, her cheeks flushed and trying to regain her composure, quickly jumped off the counter. "Of course, Manabe," she said, her voice slightly shaky. She filled a glass with water and handed it to him, her swollen lips and the lingering glint of desire in her eyes only noticeable to Kyo. Manabe took the glass with a grateful nod. "Thanks, Honda." "No problem," Tohru said, forcing a smile. Manabe gave her a small, awkward wave before heading back upstairs. Once the door closed behind him, Tohru let out a sigh of relief and walked straight into Kyo's arms. He wrapped his arms around her, resting his chin on top of her head. "I don't like that guy," Kyo muttered gruffly. Tohru giggled softly in his chest. "He's not that bad." Tohru pulled back slightly, noticing the hint of discomfort in his eyes. Tohru looked up at him, concern evident on her face. "You look like you're in pain." Kyo shrugged. "Just a little headache. Nothing to worry about." Tohru's frown deepened, but she quickly brightened, a mischievous smile forming on her lips. "If you help me with the dishes, you can come to my room, and we can finish what we started." Kyo's eyes lit up with a smirk. "Deal." They turned back to the sink, and Tohru flipped the water on. They worked in sync, Tohru washing and Kyo drying and putting away the dishes. As they worked, Kyo asked casually, "So what are your plans on Friday?" Tohru froze for a moment, knowing that Kyo might not be thrilled about her going to the party. She hesitated before answering, "Uo-chan and I are planning to watch a movie and play some games." Kyo seemed to accept the explanation, though his voice carried a hint of sadness. "I hope you have fun." Tohru's heart ached at his tone. She looked up at him, her expression conflicted. "What will you do while I'm out?" Kyo shrugged. "I'll figure something out." Seeing the frown on her face, he chuckled softly. "It's fine, dummy. Go hang out with your friends. It's important to spend time with them before we move." Tohru's heart sank as she remembered that they would be moving to the mountains in just 5 months. She hesitated, her expression troubled. Kyo noticed her distress and put down the dish she was drying, pulling her into a comforting hug. "It's okay," he said soothingly. "It's your choice to stay or go. I won't drag you away from your friends." Tohru looked up at him, her eyes fierce. "I'll go with you even if it's the last thing I do." Kyo chuckled, pulling her back into his embrace. "I know, and I love you for it." They held each other for a moment before Kyo pulled away to finish drying the last dish. When he put it away, he asked, "Is that the last of it?" Tohru nodded. "Yes." Kyo smirked, satisfied. "Good." Without warning, he scooped her up in his arms, lifting her effortlessly in bridal style. She giggled, calling his names in playful protest, but Kyo was already heading toward the staircase. "To the bedroom," he declared. "You've got a deal to uphold." You Don't Go to Parties, Chapter 4. Thursday morning dawned, bright and crisp, but for Tohru, it felt like time was moving too fast. She was seated at her desk, nervously twirling a pencil as she thought about the upcoming Friday. Uo-chan and Hana-chan approached her with their usual bright smiles, their energy immediately lifting Toru's spirits. "Good morning, Tohru," Uo-chan greeted, plopping down next to her. "Morning," Tohru responded, her face lighting up. Hana-chan joined them, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Hana-chan, Uo-chan, are you both excited for Friday?" Tohru asked, her voice bubbling with enthusiasm. Hana-chan's eyes widened. "Of course. It's going to be so much fun. We've been looking forward to it all week." Toru's smile broadened. "I'm really excited too. It's going to be a blast." Uo-chan raised an eyebrow, her gaze shifting to Tohru with a hint of surprise. "I'm surprised that Carrot Tops isn't joining us." Toru's smile faltered slightly as she looked down. "Oh, well, that's because he doesn't know I'm going to the party." Arisa and Saki exchanged confused glances. "What do you mean he doesn't know?" Saki asked, her curiosity piqued. Tohru sighed softly, her cheeks tinged with pink. "Kyo doesn't want me to go. He's worried I might get lost or something." Uo-chan and Hana-chan's eyes sparkled with a mix of amusement and mischief. They had seen Toru's rare rebellious lead to memorable moments before. "Really?" Uo-chan said with a smirk. "Tohru, when you decide to rebel, it's always quite the adventure." Tohru nodded, her expression earnest. "Please don't tell Kyo. I don't want him to worry." Before anyone could respond, strong, familiar arms wrapped around Tohru from behind. She stiffened, her eyes widening in surprise. Uo-chan and Hana-chan exchanged smirks, clearly enjoying the unfolding situation. Kyo's voice, low and teasing, broke through the moment. "Don't tell Kyo what?" Tohru's heart raced as she turned to see Kyo standing beside her, his gaze shifting between her and her friends. Her friends' amusement was palpable as they tried to suppress their laughter. Uo-chan quickly stepped in, trying to deflect attention. "Oh, we were talking about the craft project Tohru was planning to make for you. She's going to work on it at Hana-chan's place." Kyo's curiosity was piqued, and he raised an eyebrow. "Craft project? I thought you were watching movies at Uo's." Tohru tried to act casual, her cheeks still flushed. "Yes, we're planning to make some crafts at Hana-chan's and then head to Uo's for movies and games." Kyo's gaze remained skeptical, but he seemed to accept the explanation. He leaned in, placed a soft kiss on Toru's forehead. "Okay, weirdo." He turned and walked back to his desk, casting one last curious glance over his shoulder. Tohru and her friends exhaled in relief, and then burst into laughter. "That was way too close," Hana-chan said, her laughter contagious. "I thought he was going to figure out for sure," Uo-chan added, still giggling. Toru's laughter mixed with relief. "Thank you both for covering for me. I don't want him to find out just yet." The school bell rang, signaling the start of their next class. They wiped away tears of laughter and headed to their seats, the anticipation for the next day's adventure still bubbling inside of them. As Tohru took her seat, she glanced over at Kyo, who was now engrossed in his work. Her heart warmed at the thought of spending time with her friends. Despite the mischief, she felt a rush of excitement and gratitude. She was eager for Friday, knowing she had managed to keep her plans a secret, if only for a little while longer. At lunchtime, Tohru and Kyo sat together at their usual spot in the classroom. The chatter of their classmates filled the room, creating a lively backdrop for their conversation. Tohru was excited about the upcoming weekend, while Kyo seemed content with their usual routine. Kyo took a bite of his sandwich and looked up, his brow furrowed in thought. "Hey, I'm planning to head over to Master's place after school. You want to join me?" Tohru's eyes lit up at the invitation. "That sounds fun, but actually, I have plans to go to the mall today." Kyo's curiosity was piqued. He raised an eyebrow and asked, "What's got you going to the mall?" Tohru hesitated for a moment, trying to keep her reasons vague. "Well, there's nothing I really need, but I thought I'd take a look around, maybe find a new dress or something." Kyo's face softened into a genuine smile. "That sounds nice. It's good to treat yourself now and then. You have to show me what you end up getting." Tohru's smile grew, touched by his thoughtfulness. "I'd love to. I'll make sure to show you whatever I find." Just then, she felt a pang of longing. She wished Kyo could join her at the party, but she knew it wasn't his thing. Gathering her courage, she decided to bring it up. "Hey, Kyo." He looked up from his lunch, his eyes attentive. "Yeah, what's up?" Tohru took a deep breath. "I was wondering, why don't you want to go to the party?" Kyo shrugged slightly, a hint of confusion in his eyes. "I don't know. It just doesn't sound like fun to me." Tohru's smile faded a bit as she pondered his response. "What if you went and found someone who made the whole party worth it? Someone who made you want to dance and stuff?" Kyo's eyes softened as he considered her words. After a pause, he shook his head. "The only person who could make me feel like that is you, and you've already got plans for Friday." Tohru's heart ached at his words. She knew he wasn't interested in parties, and that he would never be the type to go out dancing. She forced a smile, trying to keep her disappointment from showing. I understand. It's okay. Kyo studied her expression, sensing that she was feeling down. Are you sure? You seem a bit upset. Tohru quickly shook her head. No, I'm fine. It's just, a random thought that popped into my head. Kyo gave her a reassuring smile. The bell rang, signaling the end of their lunch break. Tohru stood up, trying to shake off her sadness. Thanks for lunch, Kyo. I'll see you later. Kyo nodded, watching her with a mixture of concern and affection. See you later, Tohru. Have fun at the mall, and don't forget to show me what you get. Tohru smiled, feeling a bit better despite the earlier disappointment. I won't forget. Thanks, Kyo. As Tohru walked away, her friends Uo-chan and Hana-chan joined her. They exchanged knowing glances, but said nothing, letting her enjoy the rest of the day. Kyo watched Tohru as she left, feeling a bit conflicted. He wanted to be supportive, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing out on something important. He tried to focus on the rest of the day, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Tohru. Tohru, meanwhile, tried to push her sadness aside as she headed to the mall. She resolved to make the most of her day, knowing that while Kyo might not be interested in parties, he was always there for her in other ways. She looked forward to showing him whatever she found and hoped that their time together in the coming days would make up for the party she was attending without him. Tohru strolled through the mall, her excitement from earlier dimming as she wandered aimlessly. Nothing seemed to catch her eye, and she longed for something bold, fun, and just a little rebellious. She turned a corner and noticed a sleek, modern store she'd never been into before. The minimalistic design of the storefront intrigued her, and she decided to explore. Inside, the store was a mix of edgy and elegant fashion. She moved through the racks, her fingers grazing over fabrics as she searched for something that would make her feel daring. Then, nestled between more conventional options, she spotted it, a little black dress that seemed to call her name. The dress was thigh-length, with thin straps and a body-hugging fit. What made it stand out was the corset lining in the middle and the fishnet material woven through it. It was unlike anything she owned, and she felt a rush of excitement. This is exactly the kind of dress she had in mind. Tohru took the dress to the fitting room and stepped inside. As she slipped it on, she felt a thrill of confidence. The dress clung to her curves in a way that made her feel elegant yet edgy. She twirled in front of the mirror, admiring the way the fabric moved. She knew this dress would be perfect for the party. After buying the dress, Tohru noticed another dress in another store's window display as she was heading out. It was a pink strapless dress adorned with 3D printed embroidered flowers. It was delicate and feminine, and she couldn't resist the temptation. She decided to buy it as well, telling herself she would pick up an extra shift at work to make up for the cost. She felt a pang of guilt, but quickly shook it off, eager to show Kyo one of the dresses when she got home. When Tohru arrived home, she found the house unusually quiet. Kyo's shoes were lying neatly by the door, and she frowned with confusion. Wasn't he supposed to be at Master's? Tohru climbed the stairs and knocked lightly on Kyo's door. Can I come in? Sure, Kyo said, his tone relaxed. She opened the door and found Kyo lying on the floor with a book. And when he saw her, he set the book aside and stood up, opening his arms for a hug. Tohru walked into his embrace, her face lightening up with a smile. Hey, you're home early, she said, looking up at him. Yeah, Kyo replied. Master wasn't feeling well today, so I decided to stay home and avoid getting myself sick. Tohru's expression shifted to one of concern. I'm sorry to hear that. I hope he feels better soon. Kyo smiled, appreciating her concern. As he glanced at the bags in her hands, he asked, What did you get? Tohru hesitated for a moment, her fingers gripping the bags tightly. Oh, just a dress. Can I see it? Kyo asked, his curiosity evident. Tohru nodded and walked to her room. She carefully pulled out the pink strapless dress from one of the bags and slipped it on. After a few minutes, she emerged from her room, the dress flowing elegantly as she walked. Kyo's eyes widened in appreciation. Wow, Tohru, you look incredible. Tohru blushed, feeling a rush of happiness at his reaction. Thank you, Kyo. He pulled her close and whispered in his ear, You continue to amaze me with how beautiful you are. Tohru's heart fluttered at his words. She giggled when Kyo spun her around, causing the dress to twirl gracefully. She felt a burst of joy and playfulness as she moved. As they shared a gentle kiss, Kyo noticed something black falling out of one of the bags on the floor. His curiosity was piqued. What's that? Tohru's face flushed with a mix of guilt and panic. She quickly grabbed the black dress from the bag and shoved it into her closet. Oh, that's just something I bought on a whim. I was thinking of returning it. Kyo raised an eyebrow, but decided not to press further. All right, if you're sure. Tohru sighed in relief. Yeah, I'm sure. Kyo smiled and suggested, How about we start dinner? I can help with prep. Tohru nodded gratefully. That sounds great. Thanks, Kyo. As Kyo headed downstairs to the kitchen, Tohru took a moment to stare at the black dress in her closet. A whirlwind of emotions, nerves, guilt, and excitement filled her. She was actually doing this, and the anticipation made her heart race. She took a deep breath, then joined Kyo in the kitchen, determined to make the most of their evening together. And as they worked side by side, Tohru couldn't help but feel a thrill of anticipation for what the weekend might bring. You Don't Go to Parties, Chapter 5. Friday morning, the kitchen was filled with the smell of sizzling bacon and the soft clinking of cutlery as Tohru, Kyo, Yuki, and Shigure gathered around the breakfast table. Tohru was practically bouncing in her seat, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Kyo glanced over at her with a smirk, shaking his head. "Tohru, could you please sit still for just a second? You're making the table shake." "Oh, I'm sorry," Tohru said, trying to steady herself, but her excitement still barely contained. "I'm just really looking forward to tonight." Yuki, observing with an amused expression, raised an eyebrow. "Tonight? What's happening tonight that has you so animated?" Shigure, always eager for a bit of a gossip or mischief, leaned in with a curious smile. "Yes, do tell. What's the big deal?" Tohru's smile widened even further. I'm just excited for tonight's activities." Kyo chuckled, clearly amused but also puzzled. "Arts and crafts? I don't get how that's so thrilling." Tohru's face briefly showed confusion before she quickly masked it with a bright smile. "Oh right, crafts. I'm just really looking forward to it." Kyo's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing something amiss. He raised an eyebrow and fixed her with a curious look. Tohru's heart raced. She forced herself to meet his gaze, hoping to maintain her composure. "Crafts! I can't wait!" Yuki and Shigure exchanged glances but said nothing, though their expressions were tinged with amusement. Kyo, however, seemed unconvinced, which made Tohru increasingly anxious. Yuki decided to probe a little further. "So what kinds of crafts are you planning on making?" Tohru's mind went blank for a split second. She scrambled to come up with a believable answer. Sock puppets," she blurted out, her voice lacking its usual confidence. Shigure burst into laughter, his eyes twinkling with mirth. "Sock puppets, huh? That sounds like fun." Yuki smiled, clearly amused by the answer. Kyo's expression remained skeptical as he looked at Tohru, his gaze questioning. "Sock puppets? That's quite specific. Are you sure that's all you're doing?" Tohru's cheeks flushed slightly under his intense scrutiny. She nodded vigorously, though her anxiety was palpable. "Yes, that's it. Sock puppets." Eventually, Kyo shrugged and returned to his breakfast, though he continued to cast occasional curious glances at Tohru. She let out a quiet sigh of relief, grateful that he seemed to have accepted her explanation for now. The rest of breakfast passed in a blur of anticipation for Tohru. She tried her best to focus on her food and the conversation around her, but her thoughts were preoccupied with the evening's plans. As the morning wore on and the school day approached, Tohru's excitement mingled with a sense of dread about the long day ahead. She knew she'd have to maintain her cover and keep her excitement under wraps until she could finally enjoy the night she'd been looking forward to. The bell rang, signaling the start of the school day, and Tohru gathered her things, feeling a mix of relief and nervous anticipation. It was going to be a long day, but she was determined to make it through, knowing that tonight would be worth it. Kyo's day had been fraught with confusion, and it seemed to be intensifying. Tohru's odd behavior had him on edge. During their walk to school, she had been unusually silent, only responding to direct questions from him or Yuki. Kyo couldn't help but feel a growing concern as he glanced at her from time to time, noticing how distracted she seemed. When they reached school, Tohru quickly joined her friends, Utani and Hanajima. They huddled together, their voices low and muffled, as if they were sharing some important secret. Kyo watched from a distance, his frustration mounting. At lunchtime, the tension was palpable. Tohru sat at the lunch table with Utani and Hanajima, barely speaking to Kyo. When he tried to join the conversation, she offered only brief responses before turning her attention back to her friends. Hiroshi and Yuzuki, sitting nearby, exchanged worried glances. "Hey Kyo, what's up with Honda?" Hiroshi finally asked, his concern evident. Kyo sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. She's been acting really strange all morning. It's like she's hiding something." Yuzuki leaned closer, eyebrows furrowing. "Did something happen between you two?" Kyo shook his head. "The only change is that she got a new dress. I told her she looked beautiful like always." Hiroshi and Yuzuki exchanged amused looks before Hiroshi teased. "Sounds like you did the right thing. Maybe she's just in a mood." Kyo rolled his eyes, clearly frustrated. "Yeah, maybe, but it feels like she's hiding something from me." Hiroshi and Yuzuki's expressions grew more serious. They exchanged a glance before Hiroshi hesitantly asked, "Is there a chance she could be cheating on you?" Kyo's eyes widened in shock. "What? No way. Tohru would never do that." Not after everything we've been through. Kyo felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. The two friends looked sympathetic, but unconvinced. Well, if you say so, Yuzuki said, but it might be worth keeping an eye out. Kyo felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach, and as the day dragged on, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Was Tohru unhappy and he had missed the signs? During the final break, Tohru went to the bathroom. Seizing the opportunity, Kyo approached Uotani and Hanajima, who were standing in the hallway. Hey, can I ask you guys something? Kyo said, his voice tinged with worry. They looked up intrigued. Sure, what's up? Kyo took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Is Tohru cheating on me? Uotani and Hanajima exchanged startled looks before bursting into laughter. Kyo's heart sank as he watched their reaction. What's so funny? He asked, feeling a mix of frustration and confusion. Uotani wiped a tear from her eye, her laughter subsiding. Kyo, you give Tohru way too much credit. She wouldn't even know how to cheat, even if she wanted to. Hanajima nodded, still chuckling, and she doesn't want to cheat. You know her. She's as honest as they come. Kyo felt a wave of relief, but remained unsettled. Then why is she acting so weird? Uotani glanced around, making sure no one was listening. We promise not to say anything, but you shouldn't stress about it. It's nothing bad, I promise. Before Kyo could ask for more details, Tohru returned from the bathroom, her face showing concern. What's going on? She asked, noticing Kyo's tense demeanor. Kyo muttered, nothing. Don't worry about it, before turning to walk away. Tohru's brows furrowed as she watched him leave. Kyo, wait! She called out, but he was already heading down the hallway. She frowned, feeling a pang of worry and confusion. As Kyo walked away, the weight of the day's events pressed heavily on him. He hoped that whatever was causing Tohru's strange behavior would soon be revealed, and that their evening together would provide some clarity. The cold silence between Tohru and Kyo was almost palpable as they walked home together. Tohru had noticed the change in Kyo's demeanor since lunch, and the weight of his silence was beginning to take its toll. She decided to break the silence, her voice gentle but tinged with concern. Kyo, she said softly, glancing at him. Is everything okay? Kyo kept his eyes straight ahead, his jaw set in a tight line. After a moment's pause, he finally responded, his voice low and uncertain. I don't know. Is everything okay with you? His tone was accusatory, and Tohru's heart skipped a beat. The tension between them was thick, and she felt a pang of anxiety. Kyo, she started, but her voice faltered. Kyo stopped, walking abruptly, his fist clenched tightly at his side. He turned to face her, and Tohru was taken back by the storm of emotions raging in his eyes. There was confusion, hurt, and something else. Something she couldn't quite place. Have I done something to upset you? Kyo asked, his voice cracking slightly. He was struggling to keep his composure. Tohru took a deep breath, her mind racing. No, Kyo, she said gently. You haven't done anything. It's just, I've had a lot on my mind today. Kyo's gaze dropped to the ground, his shoulders sagging slightly as he tried to hide his feelings. Why have you been acting so strange today? He asked quietly, his voice almost pleading. Tohru felt a surge of guilt and sadness. She reached out and took his hand, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip. Kyo looked down at her, his eyes softening slightly. I'm sorry, she said, her voice filled with sincerity. I didn't mean to make you worry. I've just been preoccupied with some things. Kyo sighed, the tension in his body easing as he pulled her into a comforting hug. I'm sorry for getting so worked up, he murmured into her hair. I didn't know what was going on with you. Tohru hugged him back, tightly, feeling a wave of relief. Kyo, if you want me to stay home this evening, I will, she offered earnestly. She genuinely cared about his feelings and was willing to give up her plans if it meant making him feel better. Kyo pulled back slightly, looking at her with a mixture of gratitude and affection. No, you deserve to have fun with your friends, he said, his voice softening. You've been looking forward to it. I don't want to be the reason you miss out. Tohru's eyes brightened with appreciation, though a hint of concern lingered. What about you? What will you do while I'm out? Kyo shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. I might just enjoy the peace and quiet. It's not often I get to have some time to myself. They walked the rest of the way home, hand in hand, the earlier tension melting away with each step. Tohru felt a renewed sense of comfort in Kyo's presence, and Kyo, despite his lingering worries, found solace in her warmth and kindness. As they reached their home, the weight of the day seemed to lift, replaced by a gentle understanding between them. Later, Kyo was stretched out in the koatsu, flipping through TV channels with a remote in his hand. The soft glow of the television and the warmth of the koatsu provided a comforting cocoon against the chilly autumn evening. Shigure was seated next to him, absorbed in typing away at his manuscript. Despite Shigure's frequent claims of quitting novel writing, the sight of him working was not unusual. A sudden thump caught Kyo's attention. He turned to see Tohru standing in the hallway, looking casual yet adorable in her jeans and a t-shirt and a zip-up hoodie. Her hair was styled into cute pigtails, making her look extra endearing. Kyo's mood lightened immediately, his early anxieties fading. "Hey," Kyo greeted warmly as he walked over to her. "You heading out now?" Tohru looked up at him, her cheeks slightly pink. "Yes." Kyo's eyes were drawn to the backpack slung over her shoulder. "Are you spending the night?" Tohru shook her head with a gentle laugh. "No, it's just we decided to do makeovers tonight." Kyo raised an eyebrow, puzzled. "I thought you guys were planning crafts and movies." Tohru's smile widened and she gave a playful shrug. "Well, for girls, we tend to change our minds about plans." Kyo nodded, still not entirely convinced, but willing to trust her. He helped her into her coat, his fingers brushing slightly against her arm. "All right, be safe out there, okay?" Tohru looked up at him with a warm smile. "I will. See you later." Kyo watched as she walked away, feeling a mix of pride and lingering concern. Once the door closed behind her, he sighed deeply and ran a hand through his hair, trying to shake off his uneasy feeling. Returning to the Kawatsu, he sank back down with a resigned sigh. Shigure, who had been quietly observing, turned to him with a raised eyebrow. "Where's she off to?" Shigure asked, finding casual interest. Kyo, trying to focus on the TV, answered distractedly. "She's going to a friend's house." Shigure hummed thoughtfully, turning back to his manuscript. "And what are you planning to do tonight?" Kyo shrugged, trying to seem nonchalant. "Probably just stay in and watch TV." Shigure's gaze remained fixed on his work. There was a curious tone in his voice. "Are you sure she's just going to a friend's house?" Kyo frowned, irritation creeping into his voice. Where else would she be going? Shigure's eyes narrowed slightly, his expression unreadable. "Just wondering. You know how it is. Who knows what girls do when they're alone." Kyo's patience snapped. "What's that supposed to mean? What are you getting at?" Shigure's face turned icy as he looked at Kyo with a cold smile. "How well do you really know Tohru?" Kyo's face flushed with anger. He stood up abruptly, his fist clenched. "Shigure, stop messing around and tell me what's going on." Shigure's smile widened as he reached into his pocket, pulling out a receipt. He handed it to Kyo, who stared at it in confusion. The receipt was from a dress shop known for its risque outfits. Kyo's heart sank as he looked at the receipt. "What's this supposed to mean?" Shigure's gaze was unwavering. "Has Tohru ever shown you anything from this place before?" Kyo's mind raced as he recalled the incident earlier in the week, the dress Tohru had hidden, and her strange behavior. He realized with a sinking feeling that Tohru had never shown him anything like this. The dots connected in his mind, and he felt a painful realization settle in. Kyo's voice trembled with a mix of rage and heartbreak. "You don't know anything about her. Just stay out of it." He turned on his heel and stormed up the stairs, his heart pounding with anguish. He slammed the door to his bedroom and began to pace frantically, his thoughts in turmoil. After a few minutes of restless pacing, he grabbed his phone and mumbled to find Hiroshi's contact. With shaky fingers, he typed a message. "I'll go." He hit send, feeling a mix of determination and desperation. He needed answers, and to confront the situation head-on. As he waited for Hiroshi's response, Kyo's mind was consumed by worry and confusion, struggling to reconcile the Tohru he knew with the unsettling possibilities that had surfaced. Crisp night air cut through Kyo's coat as he, Hiroshi, and Yuzuki walked briskly to the train station. The cold was biting at Kyo's exposed skin, making him wish he had bundled up more. Hiroshi and Yuzuki flanked him, their presence a small comfort amidst his growing anxiety. Hiroshi glanced at Kyo, his expression turning serious. "Kyo, do you really think Tohru was cheating on you?" Kyo sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know for sure, but with the way she's been acting, the receipt from the dress shop, and Shigure's insinuations, it's the only thing that makes sense right now." Yuzuki shook his head, his tone firm. "Come on, Kyo, this is Honda we're talking about. There's no way she's cheating." Kyo muttered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "I hope you're right." As they boarded the train, Kyo felt a surge of unease. The idea of going to the party felt like a way to get back at her somehow, a twisted form of catharsis. Hiroshi and Yuzuki chatted beside him, but Kyo could barely focus on their conversation. Hiroshi sighed, glancing at Kyo with a hint of concern. "Maybe Yuzuki is right. Maybe she just bought the dress for a gift or to surprise you." Yuzuki perked up, looking inquisitive. "Do you have an anniversary coming up or something?" Kyo shook his head, feeling the weight of the situation. "No, we don't. And honestly, Tohru doesn't wear things like that." Hiroshi's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Not even during, sex?" Kyo's face flushed deeply. He stammered, I wouldn't know. We haven't done that yet. Before Hiroshi and Yuzuki could respond, Kyo's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to see a message from Kazuma. Kyo's heart sank. It wasn't from Tohru. The realization hit him hard. The gnawing worry about her fidelity returned with full force. He slipped his phone back in his pocket, his mind racing. As they disembarked from the train and made their way to the party venue, Kyo struggled to keep up with Hiroshi and Yuzuki's conversation. His mind was tangled in knots of doubt and fear. The thought of Tohru potentially cheating on him felt like a gut-wrenching nightmare. She was everything to him, and the idea of losing her was unbearable. Hiroshi glanced back at Kyo, noticing his distracted demeanor. Hey, you alright? You seem a little off. Kyo forced a nod, trying to mask his turmoil. Yeah, just a lot on my mind. Yuzuki gave him a sympathetic look. If you need to talk about it, we're here for you. But I'm telling you, Hana doesn't seem like the type to cheat. Kyo managed a faint smile, appreciating their support, but feeling the weight of uncertainty still pressing down on him. As they approached the party, his heart pounded and his thoughts continued to spiral. If Shigure's suspicions were true, Kyo couldn't fathom how he would move on. Tohru was his everything. And the thought of losing her was almost too much to bear. As Kyo stepped into the cave, he wasn't sure what to expect, but this wasn't it. The natural ruggedness of the cave had been transformed into a surreal party space. Strings of LED lights and fairy lights draped over the jagged rocks, casting an otherworldly glow. Neon lights flashed rhythmically to the pounding beat of electronic music, creating a dizzying array of colors. Glow sticks bobbed up and down as people danced, adding to the kaleidoscope of light. The warmth of the artificial lighting was a stark contrast to the cold night air outside, but it only added to the surreal atmosphere. Kyo felt a pang of discomfort as he surveyed the scene. The crowd was dense and chaotic. People were everywhere, dancing, laughing, kissing. The sight made Kyo's heart ache. His anxiety about Tohru and his own insecurities only amplified his discomfort. He wasn't a fan of parties under the best circumstances, and tonight it felt almost unbearable. Hiroshi and Yuzuki had wandered off, leaving Kyo to navigate the maze of pulsating lights and throbbing music alone. He wandered aimlessly, trying to absorb his surroundings, but feeling increasingly overwhelmed. The noise and the constant motion had made it hard to focus. He eventually found himself drawn to the moon pool, a shimmering pool of water illuminated by submerged lights. People were gathered around it, some dancing in the shallow water, others just hanging out. Kyo's eyes scanned the crowd, and then he saw her. In the midst of the chaos, one girl stood out. She was dancing with a blonde and a girl with black hair. Even though she was facing away from him, something about her caught Kyo's attention. There was an effortless grace to her movements that drew him in. He watched her for a while, feeling a strange mix of fascination and guilt. If things with Tohru were resolved positively, he didn't want this moment to weigh on his conscience. But the girl's presence was mesmerizing. Kyo forced himself to look away, trying to ignore the pull he felt towards her. He continued wandering, his steps growing more aimless. The music and lights that seemed so captivating at first were now just overwhelming. He had decided to leave when Hiroshi and Yuzuki suddenly appeared beside him. Yuzuki, breathless from excitement, said, Kyo, you won't believe it. There's a girl here who looks just like Honda. Hiroshi, equally excited, added, yeah, and she's hella hot. Kyo's heart skipped a beat. Where? Where is she? Hiroshi pointed towards the moon pool. She's over there, in the moon pool. Kyo's gaze snapped back to the moon pool. His heart raced as he saw the girl dancing, her features illuminated by the shifting lights. It was the same girl he had been watching earlier. His breath hitched as he tried to make sense of the situation. The girl's resemblance to Tohru was striking, but it didn't make sense. Why would Tohru be here, dancing with other people, in a place like this? Yuzuki noticed the change in Kyo's demeanor and asked, What's wrong? Do you know her? Kyo shook his head, his mind racing. I thought it was Tohru for a second, but it can't be. Hiroshi and Yuzuki exchanged puzzled glances. Are you sure? Kyo nodded, though doubt gnawed at him. Yeah, I'm sure. It's probably just a coincidence. Hiroshi placed a reassuring hand on Kyo's shoulder. Hey, if you want to check it out, we won't tell. Kyo paused, taking a deep breath as he looked back toward the moon pool. His thoughts were a whirlwind of doubt and anxiety. Tohru wasn't one who would enjoy a wild party like this. The idea that she might be here seemed implausible. Yuzuki, observing Kyo's troubled expression, tried to reassure him. It probably isn't her. Hana doesn't seem like the type to party like this. Hiroshi nodded in agreement, though he added with a smirk, and besides, this girl is hot anyways. Kyo shot Hiroshi a disbelieving look. Hot? You mean, why would you even... Hiroshi, sensing the disapproval in Kyo's tone, quickly attempted to salvage the situation. I mean, you know, Honda's cute, but not hot. Izuki gave Hiroshi a amused shake of his head, signaling that the conversation was going nowhere. This isn't really helping, Hiroshi. Kyo's gaze shifted back to the girl in the moon pool. Despite the flurry of partygoers around her, she stood out. Her long brown hair mostly down, with 2 pigtails on top and the bubble braids cascading down her back, shimmered in the dim, colorful light. He turned to Izuki and Hiroshi, resolve firming up in his mind. I'm going to talk to her. Izuki called out to him as Kyo started to push his way through the crowd. Wait, what if it's not Honda? What are you going to do then? Kyo ran his fingers through his hair, frustration and determination evident in his voice. I don't know yet. I just need to find out. Hiroshi, with a mischievous grin, added, And if it isn't Honda, get her number for me. Kyo rolled his eyes but didn't bother to respond. His focus was now entirely on reaching the girl. He navigated through the crowd, pushing past people who were too engrossed in their own revelry to notice him. As he finally made his way to the center of the moon pool, he caught sight of the girl again. The glimmer in her hair, reminiscent of Tohru's tinsel, momentarily threw him off. The girl's features, although similar to Tohru's form from a distance, were becoming clearer the closer he got. Kyo stopped in his tracks. A wave of realization hit him. Regardless of who this girl was, his feelings for Tohru were unwavering. He loved Tohru, and he had no interest in anyone else. Just as he began to turn away, ready to return to his friends and leave the party behind, a familiar voice cut through the noise. Kyo? Kyo turned around, and when his eyes locked on her, the world seemed to slow down. It was her. Tohru. She was here, in the middle of it all, dancing like she didn't have a care in the world. Relief flooded through him, washing away the dark thoughts that had clouded his mind. She wasn't cheating. She was just here, living in the moment. He felt a pang of guilt for even doubting her, but that emotion was quickly eclipsed by something far stronger. Desire. Hiroshi had been right. She looked hot. Tohru looked absolutely stunning. More than stunning, she was breathtaking. The thigh-length black dress she wore hugged her curves in a way that made Kyo's heart race. The delicate straps holding it up revealed just enough of her chest to make it hard for him to look away. The bodice, with its corset structure, was lined with a fishnet mesh that teased the skin beneath, making his thoughts spiral. Her hair, usually simple and sweet, was done up with braids in the front, glittering with tinsel that caught the light every time she moved. And her makeup? Kyo had never seen her like this before. The smoky eye made her gaze look intense, almost sultry, and a dusting of glitter made her skin shimmer under the lights. He barely heard her when she called his name again, snapping him out of his trance. Kyo, what are you doing here? He managed a small smile, though his heart was pounding in his chest. I could ask you the same thing, he replied, his voice rough with the effort to keep it steady. She smiled back and Kyo felt heat rush through his body that had nothing to do with the crowded warm room. Her smile, always so sweet and innocent, now held a hint of something else, something that made his breath catch. She glanced around before grabbing his hand, her touch sending a spark through him, and led him to a quieter corner away from the noise and flashing lights. Kyo followed her, his mind reeling. As they walked, he couldn't tear his eyes away from her, the way the dress clung to her, the way her hips swayed with each step, the way her hair moved as she walked. It was all too much. The dress left almost nothing to imagination, and Kyo found himself swallowing hard, trying to keep his thoughts in check. When they finally stopped, Tohru turned to him, her eyes soft but serious. I'm sorry I didn't tell you where I was going. The truth is, I just wanted to be someone else for a night, to feel different, you know? Kyo nodded, understanding more than he could put into words. He smiled at her, a small, genuine smile. I get it. Really, I do, honestly. I thought you were cheating on me. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of his own confession. I came here to, I don't know, rebel or something. Tohru's eyes widened, and then she did something that took him by surprise. She laughed, a light musical sound that made Kyo's heart flip in his chest. Cheating on you? Kyo, I would never do that. I know, he said quickly, stepping closer to her, his voice sincere. I know that now. But, can I be honest with you? Tohru looked at him, slightly confused, but she nodded, her eyes full of trust. Kyo took a deep breath, his eyes locking onto hers. I can explain everything later, but right now, you look so fucking sexy and I can't think of anything else. The shift in Tohru's expression was instant. Her lips curved into a smirk that Kyo had never seen on her before, one that made his pulse quicken. Her eyes darkened, her gaze intense and filled with something dangerously flirty. Kyo felt a surge of want course through him, stronger than anything he had ever felt before. This was a side of Tohru he had never seen, and he was captivated by it. She stepped closer, so close that he could feel the warmth of her body, the scent of her perfume. She was almost at eye level with him, thanks to the heels she was wearing, and her voice was low, almost a whisper. "Do you want to dance?" Kyo found himself nodding, unable to speak as his heart hammered in his chest. She smiled, a smile that was both sweet and seductively inviting, and took his hand, leading him back to the moon pool where the music was loud and the lights were dimmed, casting a sultry glow over everything. At first, Kyo was stiff, unsure how to move, how to act. This was new, different, and he didn't want to mess it up. But Tohru, to his surprise, took the lead. She leaned in close, her lips brushing against his ear as she whispered, "Loosen up, Kyo." Her hand slid down his arms, guiding his hands to rest on her hips, her touch sending shivers down his spine. Kyo let out a shaky breath, trying to calm his racing heart as they began to move together. The feeling of her body pressed against his was electric, every touch, every sway of her hips making his skin tingle. Her movements were fluid, confident, and so incredibly hot that Kyo struggled to breathe. He couldn't believe this was the same Tohru who would blush at a simple compliment. His hands rested on her lower hips, holding her close as they moved in sync with the music. The sensation of her body pressing against his, her breath warm against his neck, was almost overwhelming. The way her hips moved, the way she pressed into him, made it impossible for Kyo to focus on anything else. Her move was deliberate, sensual, and it was driving him wild. He wasn't sure how long they danced, lost in the heat and the music. But at some point, their lips met in a kiss that was far more intense than any they shared before. It was fiery, desperate, filled with the need that neither of them had ever felt. One kiss turned into another, and then another, until they couldn't stop. Their bodies pressed closer, the kiss deepening with each moment. Their hands exploring, touching, holding on as if letting go wasn't an option. Kyo's hands roamed over her body, pulling her closer, his mind consumed with the feeling of her beneath his fingertips. They had kissed before, made out plenty of times, but this was different. This was urgent, primal, and filled with a hunger that neither of them could deny. They clung to each other, the intensity of the movement threatening to consume them. This Tohru was different, bold, confident, and so incredibly sexy that Kyo couldn't get enough. He didn't want to let go, didn't want this moment to end. When she finally pulled away, breathless and flushed, Kyo let out a groan of frustration at the loss of her. She stared at him, her eyes dark and full of desire, her lips swollen from their kisses. Kyo could barely think, his mind clouded with want. As he pulled her close, his voice gravelly with need as he whispered in her ear, "What's up, baby?" His words sent a visible shiver through her, and she pulled back just enough to meet his gaze. Her eyes sparkled with a daring look that made Kyo's heart race even faster. "Do you want to get out of here?" she asked, her voice soft, but laced with the promise of something more. Kyo stared at her, still stunned that this sexy, confident woman was his. She was so different, yet so undeniably Tohru. A smile spread across his face, one filled with admiration and desire. "Yeah," he breathed, nodding, unable to tear his eyes away from her. He took her hand, pulling her away from the moon pool, away from the noise and the crowd, and into the cool night air. As they left the caves, the night seemed to wrap around them, the stars above twinkling in a sky that felt a little brighter. Kyo couldn't stop staring at her, still trying to wrap his mind around the fact that this incredibly sexy, confident woman was his Tohru. He felt a swell of affection and love mixed with the undeniable heat of the moment, and he knew this night was one he would never forget. The train ride back was filled with the mix of hushed whispers and stolen touches. Kyo's voice low and deep brushed against Tohru's ear. "I can't wait to get that dress off of you," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. Tohru's response was a soft, shivering moan, and Kyo felt his pulse quicken at the sound. As the train rumbled through the night, their hands were intertwined, fingers caressing each other with intensity that matched their growing anticipation. Tohru leaned closer, her voice barely audible over the rumble of the train. "You make it so hard to stay calm." Kyo's eyes darkened with desire as he whispered back, "I don't want you to stay calm. I want you to feel everything." When they finally arrived at Shigure's house, the darkness and emptiness of the place seemed to amplify their urgency. The moment the front door clicked shut behind them, Kyo's hands were on Tohru, pulling her close and crashing his lips against hers. Their kisses were hungry, their movements urgent as they made their way up the stairs. They stumbled into Kyo's room, barely managing to shut and lock the door behind them. Kyo wasted no time, his fingers deftly unzipping Tohru's dress, and as the fabric slipped away, he took a moment to appreciate the sight before him. Her body, now revealed, was more alluring than he had imagined. The soft glow of the room highlighted every curve, and Kyo's breath caught in his throat. "You look incredible," he breathed, his eyes devouring her. "I can't even describe how beautiful you are." Tohru's cheeks flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and pleasure. "Kyo." Kyo was lost in the sounds she made, her soft moans, her gasps as he explored her body. The sex was a mix of urgency and tenderness, a tangle of limbs and passion. They were both eager, their movements sometimes clumsy, but fueled by a shared, undeniable need. Despite the fever, Kyo was always gentle, his hands and lips caressing her with a delicate care. "Are you okay?" he asked, between kisses, his voice rough and concerned. "Tell me if I'm hurting you." Tohru's answer came in the form of a breathless, "No, you're perfect," as she clung to him, her body pressed close to his. Kyo's heart swelled at his words, his touch growing even more tender as he made sure she felt cherished and loved. Their passion built, and they fell into a tangled heap on the bed, their bodies glistening with sweat, clothes discarded in a haphazard pile. Kyo laid beside Tohru, propped up on one elbow, watching as her breathing gradually evened out. Her makeup was smeared, and her hair was a wild cascade across the pillow. Kyo's heart ached with tenderness as he brushed a strand away from her face. "You're so beautiful," he whispered, his voice soft and filled with affection. Tohru stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open for a brief moment. She gave him a sleepy smile, her voice drowsy but filled with warmth. "Kyo." He leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I love you, Tohru," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for tonight." Tohru sighed contently, her smile widening. "I love you too." As Kyo settled back down beside her, he took a moment to reflect on the night. Despite the chaos and confusion earlier, being with Tohru, feeling her warmth beside him, made everything seem right. He pulled her close, their bodies entangled in a comfortable embrace, and closed his eyes. With Tohru sleeping peacefully beside him, her presence a soothing balm to the restless heart, Kyo drifted off into a deep, content sleep, holding her close and cherishing the quiet intimacy they had shared. Kyo stirred awake, the early morning light gently seeping through the curtains. His body was wrapped in a warmth that was unusual for him, and for a split second he couldn't figure out why. But then, as his gaze settled on the clock reading 6:05 and his surroundings started to come into focus, it all clicked. He was naked, and so was the girl curled up next to him, Tohru. A slow, tender smile crept onto his face. How could he not smile? Tohru was lying beside him, her body pressed against his under the covers, her chest rising and falling softly with each breath. The events of the previous night came flooding back to him, making his heart race and his skin tingle with the memory of every touch, every kiss, every whispered word between them. Kyo couldn't resist the urge to just watch her for a moment, taking in every detail. Her hair was a bit messy, strands falling all over her face on the pillow, and her makeup was slightly smudged from the heat of their passion last night. But she had never looked more beautiful to him. Unable to help himself, he gently brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, his fingers lingering on her soft skin. The touch caused her to stir, and he watched as her eyes fluttered open slowly, her gaze sleepy and a little disoriented at first. "Good morning," Kyo whispered, his voice thick and raspy from sleep. Tohru blinked a few times, her sleepy confusion giving way to recognition, and then a soft, shy smile. "Hi," she whispered back, her voice just as soft. "How'd you sleep?" he asked, keeping his voice low, not wanting to break the gentle calm of the morning. Tohru gave a little nod, her smile growing as she snuggled closer to him, resting her head against his chest. Kyo's heart skipped a beat as he felt her warm breath on his skin, her body molding perfectly against his. He wrapped an arm around her, holding her close as his other hand traced lazy circles on her bare back. The room was quiet, the only sound being the soft breathing of their synchronized breaths. After a few peaceful moments, Kyo felt Tohru shift slightly, and he glanced down to find her looking up at him with those big brown eyes of hers. She was more awake now, her gaze clear and filled with something that made his chest tighten, in the best way. "What?" Kyo asked, a playful smile tugging at his lips. "What's that smile for?" Tohru blushed a little bit, ducking her head shyly before looking back at him. "I'm just happy," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Kyo felt a surge of emotion at her words. He reached up, gently cupping her cheek in his hand, his thumb brushing over her soft skin. "Yeah?" he murmured, his gaze searching hers. "Yeah," she replied, leaning into his touch, her eyes closing briefly as if she were savoring the feel of his hand on her face. Kyo felt his heart swell with affection. He pulled her even closer, their bodies pressing together, skin against skin, and it sent a shiver of electricity down his spine. He couldn't resist anymore. Laying down, he pressed his lips to the delicate curve of her neck, trailing soft, slow kisses along her skin. He could feel her shiver underneath his touch, her breath hitching in a way that drove him wild. "Kyo," she breathed, her voice a mix of need and hesitation. "Do you like that?" he asked, his voice filled with desire as he continued to kiss her neck, his lips brushing against the sensitive spot just below her ear. Tohru nodded, her fingers curling into the sheets as she let out a soft, breathy moan that made Kyo's pulse quicken. He pulled back slightly to look at her, and what he saw in her eyes made his breath catch. Pure, unfiltered desire, mixed with trust and affection. It was a look that made him feel like he was the luckiest guy in the world. Last night had been intense, filled with a desperate need that left them both breathless and exhausted. But now, in the quiet morning light, Kyo wanted to take his time, to savor every moment with her. He leaned in, capturing her lips in a kiss that was slow and deep, full of everything he felt for her. Tohru responded instantly, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair as she kissed him back, the warmth of her body pressing against his. As they kissed, Kyo let his hands roam over her body, exploring every curve, every inch of her soft skin. He could feel her heart racing against his, her body responding to his touch with little shivers and gasps that made his blood heat. Somehow, without even realizing it, he found himself looking down at her, their bodies aligned perfectly. He took a moment to look at her, to really see her. Her cheeks were flushed, her lips slightly swollen from their kisses, her hair spreading out like a halo on the pillow. She was breathtaking. "You're so beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. It wasn't just a compliment, it was a declaration, a truth he felt with every fiber of his being. Tohru's eyes softened and she reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Kyo," she whispered, her voice filled with so much love, it almost made him choke up. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead, then her nose, and finally her lips. But he didn't stop there. He kissed his way down her neck, across her collarbone, taking his time to appreciate every inch of her. He could hear her breathing growing more uneven, could feel the way her body responded to every touch. But he wanted more. He wanted to hear her say it, to tell him what she needed. Pulling back slightly, he looked into her eyes, his voice low and husky as he asked, "What do you want, princess?" Tohru's breath caught and she looked up at him with wide, dark eyes. She whispered his name, her voice trembling with need, but Kyo wasn't going to let her off that easily. He needed to hear it. "Tell me what you want," he murmured, his lips brushing against her ear as she spoke. She let out a shaky breath, her body arching slightly as she whispered, "You. I want you, Kyo." Kyo felt a rush of heat as her words, a primal satisfaction that made him smirk. "Good girl," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her lips before moving lower, letting his hands and mouth explore her body in a way that made her gasp and shudder beneath him. He took his time, savoring every sound she made, every touch, every look of pure desire that crossed her face. At one point, as the tension between them built, Tohru let out a soft, breathy moan, her voice filled with pleasure. Kyo quickly covered her mouth with his hand, his voice a teasing whisper as he said, "Careful, baby girl. I don't know who's home or if they're awake." Tohru nodded, biting her lip to stifle the sound she was making, her eyes wide and filled with a mixture of desire and embarrassment. Kyo couldn't help but grin, leaning down to press a kiss to her forehead. "Good girl," he murmured, his voice filled with affection as he continued to touch her, to bring her to the brink of pleasure. They moved together, a perfect harmony of passion and affection, until finally they were both left breathless, their bodies trembling from the intensity of it all. Kyo collapsed beside her, pulling her close as they both tried to catch their breath. "How was that?" he asked after a moment, his voice filled with a teasing warmth as he looked down at her, his hand brushing over her hair. Tohru blushed, a soft giggle escaping her lips as a reply. Kyo laughed, a deep, satisfied sound that rumbled in his chest. He leaned in, pressing a tender kiss to her temple as he whispered, "I love you, Tohru." Tohru smiled up at him, her eyes shining with happiness as she whispered back, "I love you too, Kyo." And in that quiet moment, wrapped in each other's arms, nothing else in the world mattered. It was just them, together, exactly where they were meant to be. You Don't Go to Parties, Chapter 8. The next Monday was a typical school day, with time slipping by as usual. When lunch arrived, Kyo and Tohru, joined by Yuki, Machi, and Manabe, made their way to the rooftop for a change of scenery. The sun cast a warm glow over the space, and the group settled down, spreading out their lunches and engaging in light conversation. Tohru and Yuki chatted animatedly about a new recipe Tohru had tried over the weekend, with Machi occasionally chiming in with questions or comments. Kyo leaned against the railing, watching them with a relaxed expression, his thoughts drifting to the events of the past weekend. Manabe, on the other hand, was unusually quiet. He ate his lunch slowly, his gaze often darting towards Tohru. His silence did not go unnoticed by Yuki and Machi, who exchanged puzzled glances but refrained from commenting. As the lunch hour neared its end, Manabe finally cleared his throat, drawing the attention of everyone around him. "Honda," he began, his voice hesitant but earnest. "Can I ask you something?" Tohru looked up, her attention shifting from her lunch. "Of course, Manabe. What's your question?" Manabe fidgeted slightly, his cheeks tinged with a light blush. "Well, the other night, I was wondering..." Tohru's eyes widened in surprise as she glanced over at Kyo, who smirked. A gentle smile spread across her face, and she nodded. "Yes, that was me." Manabe's eyes widened, and he let out a low whistle. "No way." The group watched as Manabe's expression shifted from shock to a mixture of awe and embarrassment. Just as he seemed about to ask more, the school bell rang, cutting through the tension and signaling the end of lunch. The group began to pack up their things. Tohru gathered her belongings with a cheerful hum, while Kyo kept a close eye on her, a protective but loving gaze. Manabe lingered behind as Kyo and Tohru stood up. As they prepared to leave, Manabe called out, "Hey, Kyo!" Kyo turned around, raising an eyebrow in curiosity. Tohru glanced back as well, her eyes showing a mix of curiosity and a hint of embarrassment from the earlier conversation. Manabe's grin widened, and he called out, "You're pretty damn lucky, you know that?" His gaze shifted to Tohru, a playful admiration evident in his eyes. Kyo's lips curled into a smirk as he shouted back, "I know." His voice was filled with a mix of pride and affection. He turned back to Tohru, who was now blushing lightly, her cheeks matching the warmth of the afternoon sun. As they started walking away, Yuki, observing the interaction with a raised eyebrow, asked Manabe, "What was that all about?" Manabe shrugged nonchalantly, his smile remaining. "Sometimes people surprise you," he said with a hint of mystery. Yuki looked intrigued, but said no more as he and Machi joined the others to heading into their next class. Manabe watched Kyo and Tohru walk off, hand in hand, his grin widening as he thought about the unexpected surprises life had to offer. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Kyo and Tohru gathered their things and headed toward the door. Just as they were about to leave, Tohru suddenly stopped in her tracks, her eyes widening. Kyo looked back, a concerned frown creasing his forehead. "What's up? You okay?" Tohru gave him a sheepish smile. "I forgot my lunchbox in the classroom." Tohru nodded, giving her a reassuring smile. "Go ahead, I'll wait here for you." "Thanks, Kyo," she said, her smile brightening as she turned and headed back up to the classroom. Kyo leaned against the wall, near the entrance, his eyes scanning the hallways as he waited. A few moments later, Hiroshi and Yuzuki appeared, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. "Hey, Kyo," Yuki called out, a friendly grin on his face. "Hey," Kyo replied, his expression turning into a smirk. "What's up?" Yuzuki gave a casual wave, and with a hint of curiosity asked, "So we didn't see you after the party. What happened? You never told us the details." Kyo's smirk widened, enjoying the suspense. But before he could answer, Hiroshi leaned in, his tone dropping conspiratorially. "Did you get that girl's number for me?" Kyo shook his head, his smirk turning into a playful grin. "Sorry, but I don't give out my girlfriend's number." Hiroshi and Yuzuki's jaws dropped simultaneously. Yuzuki's eyes widened in shock as he stuttered, "Holy crap!" Hiroshi looked like he had just seen a ghost. "That was Honda? Are you kidding me?" Kyo chuckled, clearly enjoying their reactions. "Yep, that was her." Hiroshi ran his fingers through his hair, his face a mix of disbelief and awe. "Holy shit, dude!" His voice trailed off, leaving the enormity of his realization hanging in the air. Kyo's laughter grew louder, savoring the moment. He looked up at his friends with a playful glint in his eyes and decided to add a final twist. "Just so you know, the dress looked much better on my bedroom floor." Hiroshi and Yuzuki's eyes went even wider, their faces flushed with embarrassment and astonishment. Hiroshi sputtered, unable to form a coherent response, while Yuzuki simply gaped. At that exact moment, Tohru reappeared, holding her lunchbox. She greeted Hiroshi and Yuzuki with a bright, cheerful smile. "Hello!" Both Hiroshi and Yuzuki mumbled distracted highs, their eyes lingering on Tohru, clearly still processing the stunning image from the previous weekend. Tohru looked at Kyo with a puzzled look. "What's going on? Why did they look so surprised?" Kyo whistled to grab their attention and, with a playful, teasing tone, said, "Just reminding you that she's mine." Tohru's confusion deepened as Kyo waved goodbye to his friends and gently took her hand. "Come on, let's get out of here." As they walked out of the school, Kyo felt a surge of pride and contentment. He glanced at Tohru, who was still looking a bit puzzled, but happy. As they walked out of the school, Kyo glanced over at Tohru, who was processing what had just happened. "Sorry about that," he said, his tone softening. "I just couldn't resist having a little fun." Tohru looked up at him, her confusion turning into a smile. "You're incorrigible, Kyo." He chuckled, wrapping an arm around her shoulder as they continued down the path. "And you're just amazing as ever. I'm one lucky guy, you know." Tohru's eyes sparkled with affection as they walked together, enjoying the end of the school day and the playful banter that had marked their relationship. Hi, my name is Angel, and I hope you like this. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe. And if you want to hear more, check out my website. Or if you want my books in an easier to read format, check out my Wattpad. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye!